Hey everybody, Data Day Wednesday, and let me tell you, as we promised yesterday, today's data, I'm thinking it's gonna freak y'all out a bit. To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. All right, we got Dean, the mad scientist, the data coming to us from the Millennial Falcon again today, which is awesome.
Do
Go,
we
go,
have
go,
to
go, go,
mention
go.
this? Do you see what happened? Chad took the spot.
I think Chad took the spot. Well, I was going to ask you because we typically sometimes we got things coming in at different times. So I've got Chad coming in at I guess 49 seconds, 9:01:49, because we were a little bit late this morning. But is that what you see on your side too? Then we got Lisa followed him, and then we don't even see Jeff this morning. We got Damon, we got James, we got everybody. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining. Holy moly.
Look at this. Everybody this morning. So we have Dean, some pretty I guess I'll kind of set it up for you to deliver the grand slam. How's that, brother?
Yeah.
So in the years that I've focused on data, focused on information in the industry, so probably call it the last kind of 10, 12 years, never have I heard of or seen what we're going to talk about today. And Dean, before you share it, have you ever seen anything like what's happening right now? Has it ever come across your plate at all?
No, normally seasonality is a pretty strong, force in the produce market in particular, and dry van and flatbed in particular. You can never bank on it, but seasonality's kind of been out the window for the last couple of years for lots of reasons. But I've not seen anything like what's happening right now. It's almost like there's this force that's trying to drag us back to seasonality. And it's dragging rates down and volumes back to normal seasonal levels in April. That's what it feels like. We'll have to see where this ends, but that's what it feels like right now. And some of the charts we'll look at tell us a little bit.
Will blow your mind, for lack of a better term. Now, I haven't told DJ because I wanted, for a very specific reason, because I wanted to see DJ's reaction live, because we can't see some of the audience's reaction, but DJ, when you hear what Dean's about to drop.
Listen, I will say I did see that. I did peek at the charts. Obviously, can't diagnose them like the mad scientist right here, but what I seen, I was a little bit scared. So I think I see what's going on. But yeah.
All right. So let's drop the ball, Dean, because I think it's
okay.
I think it's going to blow people away. Yeah. So. Yeah. Obviously, as y'all could probably figure out, it's got something to do with produce, flatbed, this kind of thing. So, Dean, drop the first ball, and I'll pull up when you're ready. You let me know, and I'll pull up that first line graph.
So, I need to set the stage a little bit, but I just connected the dots. I've just realized from Jeff Dickinson's picture, I'd never connected the name because I never looked at his picture, but he has some of the best takes on LinkedIn. I'm an avid fan of Jeff's work on LinkedIn. He has some awesome posts. But anyway, I digress.
Shout out to Jeff.
So as of this morning, spot rates are still sliding, right? So normally in April, we kind of look for this plateau, this bottoming out effect, and then produce season comes in and then it ramps up. So we're trying to tell a bit of a story around the data and or data, depending on where you live, or
tomato. It's all good.
Yeah, exactly. Data. I think we all say it differently anyways between the three of us.
Some countries it's data if you're English, or data or data. So anyway.
Data.
As of this morning, these are pretty scary numbers. As of this morning, line haul rates in dry van are down 4.2 cents already in the first 3 days of this week. Refrigerated down 7.4. That's staggering. They've been dropping at about a clip of 7 cents a mile for the last 7 or 8 weeks. Flatbed reasonably flat, so it's holding its own. But reefer is kind of the alarming story. Its rates are literally cooling off very, very quickly. And
no pun intended.
No, no pun intending. And flatbed's flat. Flatbed's flat. Like, I call it as I see it. You've got to be able to tell a story around data, right? And some of it's, we've got to have some, got to add a lot of color to what we're talking about. But data tells an interesting story. And one of the things we've been looking at is colder weather. We've always talked about what's the weather, right, on this show. Weather's a very important indicator of seasonality, particularly in produce, as the ground warms and produce moves from south to north. So off to a colder start in Florida. We had the big truck show at 75 Chrome Shop in Wildwood last week. Couple of hundred trucks. Took the week off to get up to no good at the truck stop there. But essentially it tightened capacity because all these big, long-hooded Peterbilts and W9s were parked up partying. So capacity tightened, rates went up. So if you didn't know that there was a massive truck show on, you'd be trying to figure out why are rates going up. So that's sort of what's happening on that part of the country. But the bigger story, I think, is out on the West Coast, and it's a little bit alarming. We're not sure how this will pan out, but there's a couple of things going on, Dan, DJ, that are very important context. California's in the middle of a 22-year mega drought. The last 3 years have been really, really bad. Last year, they fallowed about 400,000 acres in California of land. So there's not enough water to even water the crops they've got, let alone plant new acreage. So, and then, of course, you've got the federal water people not allocating water, as we covered on a show a couple of weeks ago. It's a pretty big deal. And they're talking about this year being pretty bad. So now what happened last year, and again, I'm not sure this is climate change or this is just changing weather patterns because of La Nina effect. But last year's citrus, so let me back up. California produces about 60% of our annual fruit and veg truckload volume. That's a big number.
That's a huge number.
It's a huge number, right? And it's all year round. And it moves around different valleys and different timings, but it's a massive market for the rest of the country. So on so volumes are we've been worried about volumes being down. Last year, the citrus season, which is a huge part, we get, a lot of our citrus from Florida goes to juicing. A lot of our citrus from oranges from California goes to fresh oranges, right? Mandarins, tangerines, all those things. But last year, the season went much longer. It went as far as August, and a lot of the fruit stayed on the crop. So normally we would see citrus peaking December, January out of California. This year it was as late as February. Sorry, last year was as late as February. This year it's even later. So the seasonality, the timing of the produce season is changing. And I'm not sure it's weather related. It could be drought related. It could be a combination of a lot of things. I still think demand is high. I still think there's demand for food services and produce. I don't see any sign that that's falling off. But if you throw up that first chart, Dan, this is the number of weekly truckloads, according to the USDA. The red line is the number of truckloads this year. And you can see going back to 2015, we're something like, for the month of April, we're off about 56% compared to the average of all of the previous Aprils. And you can see the seasonality, right? So you can see it normally picks up about now, and the truckload volumes sort of peak around July 4, and then they come off. And Jeff's saying Lake Mead Reservoir is crippling. Yeah, there you go. So I think this is an interesting thing for refrigerated carriers, because for me, this explains the dramatic slide in produce rates, reefer carriers. I mean, they are off 80 cents a mile year to date. So line haul refrigerated national average rates off 80 cents a mile since then. And if I could I can quote you one other statistic around this. Before we get to the next chart, Dan, the data show, I looked at the data yesterday. So California produce volumes, where were we? We were here. And so West Coast capacity has been, tightening, but not at the rate we'd normally expect. National average rates in California are only going up by like 3 cents a mile last week, only averaging $2.53 a mile, excluding fuel. In Fresno, capacity remained flat at $2.33 a mile this week. Normally, rates are sort of heading north in a hurry out of the Central Valley. One of the lanes I watch is Fresno to Hunts Point, 3,000 miles, dominated by team drivers We're doing round trips each week out of Fresno to New York and even Boston. On this lane, spot rates are up 19 cents a mile. You'd say, wow, that's the market's tightening. Well, it is on that lane, but the average was only $2.19, excluding fuel. That's 68 cents a mile lower than this time last year.
Holy.
I was going to say that's really low for
Yeah,
produce,
that's
team
really
drivers,
Right.
reefer. Like,
Yeah. So that's the
Yeah.
national average. Keep in mind, that's the national average. Team drivers have probably got a premium on some of those loads because the national average pulls everything sort of together, the highs
Okay.
and the lows. But to me, that tells me that produce season is off to a really slow start. And as you can see from the chart, it may pick up. We've got time before it picks up. Demand seems pretty good in the food services sector. If my wife's catering business is anything to go by, they are getting new jobs every week for graduations, weddings, parties, bar mitzvahs. There's so much activity. There's so much pent up demand for food services. I just see across the country really strong demand for food services over the summer. So I think demand will be good. As to whether California can produce and meet the demand, that's a whole nother question. And typically
Dean,
what we see
can I
is...
ask a question on this data, if you don't
Yep.
mind?
Yep.
So if I look at this, and for all of you watching on the podcast later, we've got a graph up that has 8 different colors.
Yep.
But 2019 is blue, 2020 is the green, 2021 is a dark blue, and 2022 is the red. So if I look at this, if I go back to 2020 and look at the produce seasons, we're up around 200,000 truckloads.
Yep.
If I'm looking at that. And then to say where we are right now, we're at about 6,000 truckloads.
Yep.
So, I mean, that right there
Jeez.
is crazy. And then if we go back to 2021, that's that blue line right underneath the green line. So we're close to, in March, we would have been up around, call it 190,000 truckloads, where we were actually right at 5,000 truckloads. So,
so it's a good point.
Like year over year, it just seems this year seems to be the anomaly as opposed to maybe the last 2 years.
Yeah. So this is the story, Dan, because the California Citrus Marketing Committee downgraded the navel orange crop by 20% from the last year. That's about 17,000 fewer truckloads. The mandarin crop will be down as much as 45% this year. That's 5,500 fewer truckloads. So that a lot of the crop yield forecasts are down now, but we've still got time to go. So it's not all doom and gloom. But I just want to sort of flag that rates are low year over year. They are trending up, but they're not trending up at anywhere near the rate we'd normally expect. Volumes are much lower. We're off to a slow start. Does it mean that the citrus season has been pushed later? So we're not seeing a spike in December, January. It'll come later this year. All these are things affect where you put your capacity and how you price different lanes. But typically, I think I'll wrap this up with typically from April through July 4, we see an upward inflection in spot rates in the order of 20 to 25 cents a mile. So dry van and reefer sort of spike around July 4, and then it falls away again to into the fall.
So if we spike at that 20, 25 cents, we are still in the neighborhood of 40, 45 cents less than we were last year, because if we're already down kind of 69 cents or whatever you said.
But here's the thing, Dan. I don't know that we'll see that material bump in rates this year. I don't know, because we're not seeing the volumes coming out of those same markets where those really long haul lanes have very lots of data in them. The rates typically aren't as high as some of the short haul lanes, but I just don't know that there's enough volume, because we've got a lot of capacity, got a lot of extra capacity this year, a lot of new entrants in the industry, a lot of trucks for the fewer loads. I think that's going to make things pretty tough this year. I don't know that we'll see the rise in spot rates that we typically do. It could just be a little bump. We'll have to wait and see.
So now, Damon has a good question too, I think.
Yes.
Can we?
And the answer is yes.
And it's exactly what I was going to ask, is if the crops aren't coming from California, where are they going to come from? Yeah. Absolutely. Come from different areas. For example, mandarins come from Asia, ? So, and I guess that's the big question as a carrier, as a salesperson, as somebody who moves freight in multiple markets. Where can we expect the constraint to start happening if it's easing on the West Coast?
So what happened in the pandemic when all of the, we had immigration issues, people couldn't get across the border, they were ploughing crops into the ground because they couldn't find people, demand crashed in April of 2020. What happened, when you go back and look at the data, Mexico stepped in to fill the void, particularly tomatoes, limes, and avocados, all through FAR and the McAllen, Texas border. That's where a lot of the volume came from. So Mexico's volume, and I don't think they were in lockdown anywhere near to the degree to what we were, so they were able to fill in that void. So let's assume if demand stays high and B, Mexico has the capacity to produce more, they will fill that void for sure if other markets stumble. I think that's a given. That's why we're seeing pretty high spot rates out of southern border markets right now, in particular for any load that's heading into Canada.
Mm-hmm. So now when we're talking Mexico producing that, is that like West Coast? Is it kind of Texas, Laredo? Like what ports are they entering into the US to come across?
Most of the volume is Laredo and FAR. So it's going to be,
so you've got
Texas.
Laredo for Mexico. Then you've got Houston for the ports. You've got all the other congestion already happening in Texas. That's probably going to continue because the ships are going to continue to come into Texas.
Yeah, they're already bringing more ships.
So you'll see a lot of the West Coast volume. You've got to remember the closest port to Mexico City is the Brownsville, McAllen area. It's like it's by hundreds of kilometers closer. So a lot of the trucks that travel north to Nogales feed Seattle, Phoenix, and Los Angeles markets, right? So you see the volume kind of goes in a sort of a V shape when you look at where it comes from. So I think the answer is yes, we're going to see more volume come out of there. There's going to be lots of, just with the extra border crossing inspections last week or the week before, we saw the capacity move from Laredo, El Paso over to Nogales to get into the US because there were less congestion and spot rates went up. So, and I'm just going to say,
Jeff brought up another good point. Dean, do you think there's enough time? Do you see that comment, Dan?
I was just actually just about to go in order from here. When you look at the graph, there's not much time, Dean, for produce to rebound considering the length of the season.
Yeah.
And so let's pull that graph up again for everybody watching when we're talking July.
This could be a longer season. I think, Jeff, the optimism in me says it'll be a longer season this year. It'll be further delayed. I think people are going to party all summer and well into the fall this year. I know I am. I can't wait to get out and about and travel. So I think that demand is going to be pretty good. But you're right. This may end up being one of our worst years for produce that we've seen in a long time, exacerbated by all the extra capacity and high fuel costs.
If I could share something. So when I was in the Dominican, so typically any times I've ever been in the Caribbean, one of the things I love is the fruit, right? Like the fruit just seems to have like the pineapples, the coconut. It just seems to have so much flavor. None this year.
Right.
Like the watermelon was not like dark pink. It was like really light pink. It was kind of, you taste it and it's like, oh my God, it kind of feels like, if you guys have ever had like watermelon smart water, where it's like it's like you can give me a few more drops of that flavor. It's got like almost zero flavor, just enough to change it from the taste of water.
We just got those little mandarins for the kids, and I swear there's no taste. They're just orange. Right. The color is orange. They forgot the taste.
So James brings up Richard brings up a good question. Could lack of people working on harvesting be part of the delay?
Absolutely.
In addition to climate?
Yep. So you've got water restrictions, ground being fallowed, not planted, not watered, and labour. So absolutely, all of those things are.
What about the gas prices over there too? I mean, they're
pretty nasty, especially when a refrigerator, right? You've got to fill that reefer tank. So it's got extra costs. So I think it's a pretty big deal. And Jeff could be right. We could see a pretty average produce season. But if that's the case domestically, we'll probably see a lot more volume come across the southern border. And I think to Damon's point, yes, there'll be more demand from Canadian farms for a lot more of the vegetables that they produce. We've got PEI potatoes coming back across. So I think, when you look at the mix, Canada produces about 92 to 93% of the annual produce import volume. Canada picks up the rest. Half of Canadian volume is potatoes. So
So half the Canadian volume for produce is potatoes?
Yeah, mostly potatoes, and it all comes from PEI.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, okay, so this is blowing me away because it's probably the smallest place in Canada, PEI, from a
It's
geographical
the biggest
perspective. And
province for potatoes. It's like the potato capital of
yeah,
the
well, I
world.
mean, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
PEI potatoes are
I thought that was
spectacular.
Idaho. No, I'm just-
Idaho produces a lot too.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. In the
But
US.
if you looked at the geographical, like,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, the size of Idaho compared to PEI,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
PEI could probably fit in a city in Idaho.
Yeah.
Like, that's how small it is. Do you know what I'm
I'm
saying?
not talking about PEI. I haven't compared PEI total tonnage to Idaho. I suspect
okay.
Idaho's bigger, but in terms of the import volume into the US, and all of it comes through Halton and is it Woodstock, Maine? There's a couple of crossings where all the spuds come across. So
Yeah, that's crazy. So Kenneth
Holy
is
moly.
asking, how will this affect import rates in other ports? Do you think it'll have an impact on rates in
Good
other
question.
ports if more produce starts coming from overseas and stuff?
yeah, definitely. Provided they can produce it and they can get break bulk reefers at a decent price or containers at a decent price. You don't get enough reefer plugs on a ship. You know, there's a massive amount of disruption going on in the port market. So it may be cost prohibitive to ship some of that freight from, citrus from Australia, for example, is another market that a lot of our winter oranges come from.
Do we have kiwis come from Australia at all?
What's that? Sorry.
Do we have kiwis that come from Australia, or is that more of a New Zealand thing?
That's a New Zealand fruit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of mangoes. You'll get a lot of mangoes from Australia, and of course wool, iron ore, all that good stuff. ACDC, the Wiggles.
Yeah. Good morning, Nirfad. Nirfad says that the Dominican imported their fruits from Ottawa while you were there. Nice. That's probably why the tomatoes were still green.
Right.
What do we got? We got Richard says it sounds like the perfect storm.
Yes.
Damon actually says that Alberta has a short potato season as well.
Huh. It's interesting.
I think Lisa asks the $1 million question though.
Where is Jeff?
What do we do? What
are some things we can do about these findings?
Wow. It's a really good question. I'm kind of not into the, taking hot takes, but I think this is, you got to watch the data weekly. So what I would say is don't assume seasonality will be as strong a force as it usually is. There's so much disruption in the market right now. We're about to see another massive storm of a level we've not seen before from the 400 plus ships sitting off Shanghai, who should all be on their way back to the US. So we're going to see a summer of disruption at port levels that's going to impact truckload capacity. What do we do with the data? I think we've got to be open and have all the data at our disposal, be very open and transparent with customers, because this is not, I don't know that you can forecast that far into the future at the moment, given all the supply chain disruptions, and say with confidence what rates are going to be. We just don't know.
But I think you can start the preparation.
Yeah.
If you're, for lack of a better term, even the data we share every Wednesday, if you just take this show, take the URL, send it to your customer and say, here's my perspective on it. If you watch that, this show and full reality, this show is miles ahead of every other media outlet right now when it comes to what we talk about and then what comes out in the news. But if you look at the ships coming in from Shanghai, how many of them are going to go into Texas as opposed to LA or the West Coast? Then you have, if that happens, and McAllen, Laredo, and all these other places are pulling produce from Mexico, you have the perfect storm in the Texas area. So if you have customers moving freight to Texas, be prepared for a massive rate war and for rates to plummet going to Texas, because they can demand so much money coming out of Texas. Second, if your customers in Texas have general freight, general commodities, be very, very cautious and have the conversations, because your rates are about to skyrocket. And it will be just like it is. Like, listen, every year during produce season, it's, carriers wait for produce season out of California, and rates going to California from Canada, from anywhere, plummet because they get the 4, 5, 6 US a mile out. And that's what they wait for. So if that's going to start shifting around the market, maybe it's going to come into Florida. Maybe Florida's going to have some kind of thing. I don't know. We can get into that now, but if that starts happening, if you have customers in these areas, and again, Dean went over it, Arizona, Texas, the conversation needs to be had. Do we know what's going to happen? No, but hey, FYI, here's what's happening now. It could mean A, B, or C, but I wanted to keep you in the know. I think that's all we can do at this point from a sales perspective.
Throw up that next chart, because I think that might answer Lisa's question. And my overall thesis, and that is that we're returning to normal. So it's almost like there's this massive force pulling rates and volumes down to what they would normally be when we were behaving normally in non-pandemic years. Now, this is Fresno to Chicago. The red line are spot rates this year. The blue line is the average of the last 3 years. So you can see how produce season kicks in Fresno. Rates start to pick up around now. They peak, sometime middle of the year. But we've come down from a very high number so far, and it remains to be seen if we're going to bottom out. But what you can see, if you look at every single lane that I could throw up here, you see the same chart. You see the red this year coming back down to meet the blue, which is the longer term average. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of markets. And that's what's catching people out, because diesel prices are skyrocketing, and so are all of our operating costs, and inflation's eating away at everything we buy.
So if you look at
now, Dean,
it's funny how at that.
Go ahead, Dan.
No. I was just looking at the chart, DJ, and right at that kind of 80-day mark, I mean, the rates are a little higher, but the graph seems to move in the same way. Did you notice that? Whereas like from 0 to about 80 to 90, that graph doesn't seem to be moving. But if we look over like right above the 100, we see that it's kind of in the same shape as it is in the blue.
Yeah.
Just a little bit higher on numbers, right? So Dean, was that just a, like what was the anomaly from January till now? What was it? Just a lead in from the Christmas season that kind of extended through?
It's the tight capacity that led up to Christmas. It's the madness of, will the shelves be empty? It was the tail end of the peak congestion from with all the, remember we had 109 vessels off Los Angeles on January 9. We're down to about 40 today. So that's what's cooled off, is a lot of the urgency in the spot market. There was a lot of urgency last year, a lot of part loads, a lot of urgency, a lot of supply chain shortages, a lot of freight had to be moved quickly. So there was a lot of things going on, but the market has cooled off dramatically since then, as you can see.
Got it. DJ, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, you brought up a great point just looking at this. The patterns, if you study the patterns, you brought up such a great point of that little blip that you see right there from the 100 to the 122. Looks like it copies that. So if it does copy that, just a heads up, anybody with anybody who messes with stocks, just pay attention for that uprise where you see after that. But again, what I was going to say is the pricing, because there's such, I mean, you see the steep decline, but the gas prices are not adjusting that fastly. What kind of a bloodbath could that cause?
Yeah.
Well, DJ, so you have the gas prices. Plus, if you look at this peak at 100 days and then where we even are at right now, and if that's the 3-year average, we're still well below. But if we look at what's changed, price of equipment's changed, fuel cost of driving has changed because drivers' wages are up. Like, Dean, what do we see there?
So with wages?
Well, no, I mean, DJ mentioned fuel because fuel's still sky high, but
our
rates are still, I mean, if you look at this time last year, our rates are in that or over the 3-year average, our rates are in that $1.90 a mile, I guess, if you look right under the 2022, and we're up around $2 a mile. But if we're only looking at kind of a 20%, 25% increase, let's say if we do get the 25%, we're going to be up in that 25. We're still going to be below that seasonal average where the blue line is, which creates then even more issues in the market from cost of fuel, driver wages, which means carriers are going to be less profitable than they were even over that 3-year average.
And probably more selective about the loads they choose. So I think the carriers are going to look at this very differently. Their operating margins have been eroded. Rates are down 12 cents year over year. Diesel's up $2 a mile in the last year. So for those carriers that are working on all-in rates, especially in the produce market, in the spot market, they've got to know their operating costs. And I worry about a lot of carriers. I just don't think they fully understand the gravity of the situation. But
That's
if capacity,
getting too tame. That's yeah.
David says both Ontario and BC have larger greenhouses for tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers as well,
bring it
which
on.
will add to some of the
Yep.
volumes. Jeff, thank you. Data is great. Best place to see new data, Dean.
Oh, right here. And
Right
Thank
there.
you.
so if I could give our DAT a plug,
100%.
Absolutely.
dat.com/market update. Every Wednesday night, we publish my blog post and all of this data and all of the charts. It's a free service. Go to the resources tab, top right of dat.com's landing page, and you'll see all the blog posts. And in it, I put all the charts that we've been talking about today. Alternately, shoot us a note at askiq@dat.com, and I might be able to pull some data for you if it's sort of within scope.
Oh, Dean, you just got a lot busier.
Oh yeah. I hope you have help, Dean.
As you were saying that, I'm like, you ever feel like you're falling, like when you're sleeping and you're falling off a cliff, you're like, no.
Yes. Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
no, Dean, you didn't just say that, but yeah, definitely. Make Dean. Jeff says, then you have extreme delays at port unloading, which could affect produce shelf life if not loaded in a timely manner.
Yes.
And I think that's why, personally, and Dean, I'd love your take on this from a data perspective, but I think that's why all of our produce over the last kind of year and a half has sucked, because it gets picked so green or so premature, knowing that it's going to sit off of the West Coast or at ports for so long.
The nutrients, it's not getting the life that it
it'll take time for this to work its way out and get back to normal in the produce market. Jeff raised a great point about the number of vessels sitting off Shanghai. Lars Jensen, who's a great guy to follow on LinkedIn from Marine Intelligence, he's probably the guru in this international shipping space. He thinks it'll take years for the supply chain to stabilize based on what's going on in Shanghai right now. It's going to cause disruption. And the ironic, I don't know if it's irony is the right word, but this wave of ships that once they get cleared and start coming back are going to arrive at the same time as contract negotiations are underway on the West Coast, which start on May 11 and conclude in July.
And that's only from the lockdown that Shanghai just had.
Right.
If you look at what's happening in Asia, they're even saying some of the major, like the capitals.
Yeah.
If something doesn't change in the next week, they were saying last week, if something doesn't change in the very near future, they'll be locked down as well. So that's like, I mean, and it's you got Shanghai, then it's going to shift to all these other places.
Yeah.
It's not even close to over with Asia's zero tolerance or China's zero tolerance.
Why it's a big deal for US and all of us in the supply chain market is the 29 ports on the West Coast represent 12% of American GDP. So that's what the labor talks are involved with, right? So if you're a shipper or an importer and you're looking for any port not named Long Beach and Los Angeles, that's why you got to watch the news, watch all this closely, look at stuff in real time, read everything, watch every show, and because this is going to change on a weekly basis. I think this is sort of, we're going to be week to week. We're going to see a lot of disruption, I think, in port markets over the rest of this year and into next year.
I also think I don't even think we've seen the worst of it yet, because as things start.
Dan, I'm glad you said that, because I think with what's going on and
if I could,
it's constantly it's a one step forward, two step back thing. And
if I could use a Faulty Towers John Cleese quote, don't mention the war, but we won't mention the war. But that, if you haven't seen Faulty Towers, you need to see that episode to know what that reference means. But we haven't seen the full impact of things like neon gas shortage that's used in the lasers to make semiconductor chips, grain, wheat, all of that stuff, food prices, commodity prices. So there's a lot of disruption to come from the other side of the world, not just in Asia. We're a long way from being out of.
And then God forbid something happen when it comes to, because they're now saying you got to be very careful about North Korea and everything, because they're watching, and China is watching what's happening with Russia and the Ukraine, and there could be things that start happening there. And I mean, it's unknown, right? But I mean, it's crazy. And so Dean, let me ask you this: how long usually would we see, or from what you can see in the data or what you've seen, over time? So we have Russia invading Ukraine, stops all the grain produce and then everything, and then all the sanctions. How long is that ripple, that rock that was thrown in the ocean on that side of the world? How long till it hits us? Is it kind of like a 3-month period? Is it a 6-month? Is there any kind of thing we can expect, or what is that?
I honestly don't know. I don't know because we don't have anything to go by.
Yeah, this is more of an anomaly.
There's so many
anomaly,
people,
right?
There's so many people and farmers that have been displaced. Does it ever come back?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Well, and then Dan, you brought up fertilizer, but then even from Russia and all of that, we have the fertilizer issue too. So that's going to mess with.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of why I'm thinking in that reference, right? Like, I'm wondering if we can find data somewhere, if there was ever a time where, like, call it grain, right, from Russia and the Ukraine, out of the top 5 suppliers in the world, there are 2 of them. And if we look at that, if there was ever a year where like a crop got destroyed or whatever, and what the timeline was for the impact in North America, as soon as this Russia attacking Ukraine happened, when I saw what Russia and the Ukraine exported, I went and got fertilizer. Like, I went and got literally 2 years worth of fertilizer right away at like the local PV and stuff. And I'll tell you, I'm glad I did, because when I was back there on Monday night, it was about 37% more, just on rough math from what I calculated. Okay. And that's Scott's fertilizer. Like, it just skyrocketed. So, already that's, and I mean, we talk obviously I know farms don't use the fertilizer we use in our houses, especially in Ontario, because of the laws and stuff. Like, we can't even use par 3 around here for weeds and stuff anymore. Like, we've got all sorts of rules and regulations, but it's amazing. It's that effect has already happened in the fertilizer. So it'd be interesting to see what happens in the wheat and the grain, because if you think about it, you have flour, cereal, like pasta, like everything, bread. Like, there's so many things that are made with these materials. And if we look at the materials and just some of the information we've collected over the last little while, and Dean, we talked about it on that show last week, but it was like, one of the largest paint manufacturers, they're scrambling left, right, and center. They can't even get dyes to get the colors of their paint. Like, it goes so far deep into the supply chain where things are shifting and moving. It's insane. It really is. Like, I think it's unprecedented for what we're going through right now. And I think it's the beginning before I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Yeah. In other words, and I know we've said this since pretty much 2020. It's like, at what point, you're right. When does a dead cat happen? Right? Like, when do we hit bottom and start coming? So, geez, we got a ton of Jeff's ending it. He says he has here's a great quote, DJ. It's more difficult to be simple, and it's easier to be more complicated.
Right.
Nice, yes, Jeff. that is a great one, Jeff. I think that's human nature.
He says I don't want to do keto. That's going back. Nirfad said, where is it? Nirfad here. He says we should all just become meat eaters. I think it would solve it. And and Richard says beat him to the punch. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
So, Dean, any last thoughts before we head out here? I know we're running quite late, but I think it's important today.
I can answer Jeff's question. I've got fuel pegged at 45% of variable costs as of today.
Oh my goodness!
But the more alarming number is it's about 40.43% of revenue. So revenue's obviously plummeting. Diesel's up. Jeff's right; it's not sustainable. And carriers are, I think if you're in the asset acquisition space, you've got to get good at negotiating, and being fair, always leaving something for the next person, because these costs are unsustainable for carriers that aren't getting the full cost recovery of the fuel.
So brokers, talk to your carriers, talk to your suppliers out there, give them the heads up, make them focus on that if they're not. Because
talk to your customers too, because in the end, it's a cyclical cycle. Right, like if we try and pillage, we're just continuously doing this. Like, we're in this almost like a roundabout with no exit, and it's just going to keep going around and around. And rates are going to drop. Carriers are going to go to business. Rates are going to skyrocket. More people are going to get in. Rates are going to drop. Carriers are going to go to business, and we're never going to get out of the cycle. And I think it's obviously bigger than the three of us and this amazing audience. But if you can all talk to 3 or 4 people about it and have them talk to 3 or 4 people, it's going to create that wave that will go across the market. And that's, we've been, begging y'all to do this for a long time now. Now's the time. Now's the time to stand united and create those relationships. If you talk to your suppliers,
we got to collaborate together on this.
Well, but I mean, if you talk to your suppliers now and have these conversations now as a broker, you're an actual asset to them. Whereas, and here's the perspective difference, right, guys? Like if we go back to when it was, dominated by a carrier market, right, where it's like, hey, listen, I got 5 loads I can choose for any one of my trucks, right? And I have had students, and this is real information. I've had students say, Dan, it's so hard to try and create a relationship because they're like, oh yeah, okay, you want a relationship now when it's 5-1, but did you want it 6 months ago when it wasn't 5-1? Like, don't take that conversation and have that ego of, well, they didn't want me to do it, so I'm not doing it now. Like, go back and have that conversation with them now. Right. Now is the time to build your next 12, 24, 36, 5 years, 10 years of relationships. Right. Now. Yeah. Right now.
Save them. You're going to need to.
Yeah, well, I mean, at least be on the same page, right? Yeah. Like be on the same page. Have the respect that, hey, okay, maybe they've been screwed before by brokers who say, I want a relationship as soon as pop markets drop. Hey, you need to drop your rate by $200. That's not a relationship. That's a relationship is, hey, FYI, the rates we've been doing for this customer, just in case rates going into, call it Texas, have plummeted. My customer's starting to get people to call them with spot quotes that are way less. Is there something we can do to work together as we navigate the waves together? One in the front of the boat, one in the back of the boat to stabilize the boat until something flatlines and things happen, and then let's go back. But that's the conversation. It's not just drop your, like, it's context, right? How many times, guys, have we talked context?
Jeff hit it on the head. Be transparent. We talk about that all the time, Dan. But I think that's what we need to do. More transparency.
You can't sugarcoat that bitter pill, right? You've got to be completely transparent.
Yeah. You know what? Jeff's got a good point. I think we should make the show an hour with Dean every week. We have a lot to discuss.
You know what's funny? Maggie said 45 minutes. I'll give her props. She said, you guys should make Dean's show 45 minutes. Just make it a special show.
And Jeff's right. Jeff's right. I mean, it is way too important. It is the importance of what Wednesdays is critical. It drives what you do. And data really does drive what you do. I mean, you look at it. So here's the thing. And here's the way I kind of started looking at data once Dean and I connected is there's a lot of information about like weight loss and what, changes in your lifestyle. I'm not going to say diets because it's a change in your lifestyle creates what, right? So people go by that data. Right. The same thing in this industry. This is where the data takes you when you watch this show.
Yeah. Dan, I was on a carrier show last night with Chuck Snow and, Rates and Lanes, the podcast we do on Tuesday nights. And so it's really carrier-centric. And I said, information is power. I said, you can't go into a negotiation not knowing what brokers are searching for trucks on what lane, what the average rate's been. You just need information before you even have the discussion. You need to know what's happening in the market, what's demand look like for the freight you haul. That's even before you get to the rate per mile. There's so much information you've got to absorb and have good business partners to help you do it. But that's how I'm talking to carriers about it. And I think we're saying the same thing here on the intermediary side, is you've got to be armed with the information to have an intelligent discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's the data information, Dean. It's the shipper and receiver information. It's everything. Right. Because it's great that we have the data. If your shipper then takes 9 hours to load your trucks, or you know what I mean? Like that's the information you need. Mm-hmm.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, I know. You know what? Actually, we've never seen Dean go off on a rant, have we?
We'll need another hour.
So what do we have in closing, Dean? What would be some of the things that you would suggest to everybody? Watch the data. We've shared with them where to go with the data. How does one interpret the data? I think that's a big question because all these graphs and stuff can sometimes seem a little overwhelming for people.
Right.
How would they interpret the data?
Don't be afraid to ask what you might think is a stupid question. There is no such thing as a stupid question.
That's right.
when I talk about data, I tend to assume most people know what we're talking about. Please don't think that we're talking over anybody. But if you've got any questions, whether you're new, in particular, if you're new to the industry, fire these questions away. And if we see a recurring theme, then we probably need to do a show just around some of the basics around understanding rate per mile, fuel surcharges, those sorts of things. But I think ask questions, read, watch, spend a good part of every day just absorbing information and weighing it on your own scales.
And if any of you have any questions, DM DJ or I. DJ and I can kind of put all the DMs together, and then we can reach out to Dean and create shows. Jeff just said, I just put that up. Jeff said, being new, I appreciate the conversation and data eye-opening. Yeah. That's the gold. That's the gold. That's why we do what we do, because it is eye-opening. Yes. And we hope that it's changed your approach for today moving forward. And that's the big thing, right? Every show has a legacy. Every conversation has a legacy, because if that just and Jeff, if that just changed one way that you're going to sell or have the next conversation today, it was worth it.
Yep. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Jeff Dickinson says, data rich, information poor. We need to change it. Change this. It's there. Understand it. 100%.
That's right. Hey, well, thank you guys. Thank you everybody for joining us. Dean, as always, I think we'll have to talk about this off, but maybe 45 minutes, an hour. I think we're at 46 now. So
I'm open.
We'll have to figure that out. Yeah. But thank you as always for joining us.
The Mad Scientist
and Logistics DAT data is right here. Every Wednesday, 9 a.m. to 9:30, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9:30. You want to start your day right with the information, motivated, ready to go. Start it right with us. Thank you to Damon, American Logistics, Chairman Trucking. Thank you to everybody for all your comments. Again, without you guys and all the information and the questions, like Dean said, don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if you're new. The only way you learn is to ask questions. So don't be afraid. And quote to take us out. I think you guys will like this one. I hope I really might drop this one, especially since the king of boom, Jeff, hit me with one. I had this from the beginning. I'm telling you, I don't even know where it came from.
You had to add that in there, right?
Had it from the beginning. I have to add it in there. But data is like water. Neglect its quality and fear the indigestion.
Oof, that's powerful.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information.